Hi, everybody. Welcome to Real Talk. I'm Ron Strand. We're at the Upper Room Studio, and I'm here to introduce part two tonight of our interview with Governor Mike Huckabee. If you didn't catch part one, be sure to go back and watch it because it was a great interview. And we're excited to jump into part two because Governor Huckabee was good enough to spend 2 hours with us, and I hope you enjoy it. Governor, we've talked about some of the things in your past. We want to talk a little bit about your political career because earlier in the interview, you had told me that you had early aspirations in politics. And I was reading about your political career, I know you started off even earlier because you were involved in a number of elections, even into the Southern Baptist Convention in your state and so forth. But most notably, I think, as Lieutenant Governor of Arkansas, you actually had political aspirations early on.
I did. And, honestly, I thought that when I went into the pastorate, that would end any possibility that I'd ever be able to run for office.
Yeah.
So for me, going into the pastorate was not just a career change from advertising and communications. It was also the death of a vision.
Yes.
It was like, okay, well, if you take this position, nobody's ever going to let a pastor run for office. So just put that aside. And I did. I just said, okay,
Yeah.
that's gone. That's something I'll just walk away from.
Yeah.
Little did I know that the Lord would open those doors all over again and take me to places I never could have dreamed. So, I again say God's grace is beyond amazing.
Yes.
And I often, I build a lot of things in my life based on Genesis chapter 50 and the story of Joseph, where Joseph had been sold into slavery by his brothers. It looked like everything that he dreamed and everything his father wanted for him, it all just totally fell apart. And then it turned out that his being sold into slavery and being in Egypt and all the things he went through, horrible things, falsely accused and in prison, but ultimately becoming second in command of Egypt, it saved the entire nation of Israel when there was a famine there. So there was a moment at which Joseph's brothers, knowing that he had every right to kill them, and they felt like he probably should, they begged for mercy. Joseph's answer is so classic. He says, "What you intended for harm, God has used for good." Well, that is a life-changing message, and it was for me to realize that even things that are intentionally designed to hurt us by
Yes.
people who are evil, don't worry about what their intents are.
Yes.
God can use it
Yes.
for good.
Yeah.
God didn't author the bad stuff,
Yeah.
but He sure can turn it around. And so, I've seen that played out in my life time and time again. And one of those areas was having the opportunity to run for office and being encouraged to do it by people who I thought would discourage me and say, "Oh, don't do that. My gosh, that'll be forsaking God for you to do that." And instead they said, "Have you ever thought about running for public office? I think you've got skills that," and I'm thinking, really?
Well, who were some of them that encouraged you at that time?
There was a pastor by the name of Truman Moore, a wonderful man of God. And he was pastor of a large church in Fort Smith, Arkansas. He was one. James Robison was another. There were other pastors that, did encourage me and sometimes just friends, people that I went to church with.
Mm-hmm.
Now, I will also be quick to tell you there were people that were very disparaging of it. Some people thought I'd lost my mind or lost my faith, and they basically said, "I'm so sorry you've quit the ministry." That was the thing I would hear a lot. And I would say, I don't believe I've quit the ministry. I think I've just continued it with a different platform.
Yeah.
And I said, I still love Jesus, still believe the Bible to be true, so I'm not sure what I quit. But I'm serving in a different kind of platform. And I've never, ever, Ron, ever felt like that I had abandoned the Lord to serve in public office.
Yes. Well, and you being in ministry, I have a background in ministry as well. Is it, it is who you are. It's not what you do. It's not necessarily your vocation. You're always doing ministry. Your life is part of ministry, and it's what flows out of you, really.
100%.
Yeah. And so your first run for lieutenant governor was 1992. You garnered 40% of the vote.
Well, that was
How did
actually U.S. Senate.
Oh, that was, okay, yes,
Yeah,
U.S.
U.S.
Senate.
Senate. And
Yes,
I
I'm sorry.
did not win that race,
Yes,
but I went back in 93, and that was when Clinton had been elected president. So
yes,
the lieutenant governor became governor. There was an
right.
opening for lieutenant governor, and that's when I ran for lieutenant governor and won.
Yes, yes, okay. And you later won the seat in the general election. Um, and you had quite a nasty reception from the Democrats there. I'm gonna read you what you wrote in your autobiography, and then you could expound upon it. But it says the doors to my office were spitefully nailed shut from the inside. Office furniture and equipment were removed, and the budget spent down to almost nothing prior to our arriving. After 59 days of public outcry, the doors were finally opened for me to occupy the actual office I had been elected to hold 2 months earlier. Wow, that's crazy. How
It
did
is
that
crazy.
how did that play out?
It was so bizarre and so almost surreal that the Wall Street Journal flew a reporter, John Fund, who was at the Journal at
Oh,
the
I know who
time,
John
flew to
Fund
Little
is,
Rock,
yes. Uh-huh.
and they wanted him to see, was this an apocryphal story, or were the doors literally physically nailed shut? And he went on to report, these doors have nails in them. They are nailed shut. So it became part of the folklore of Arkansas politics that, I'm the guy that they couldn't keep him from getting elected, but they tried to keep me out of the Capitol. Here's what happened. Here's another great moment. This is a Joseph and his brothers moment. What was intended for harm, because they thought, we're going to discourage him. We're going to make him wish he'd never run for this office. But people around the state, even Democrats who never voted for me and probably thought they never would, they were outraged because people in the state have a sense of fairness and decency.
Yeah.
And they felt that this was just evil and ugly, and that it was the kind of thing that was childish to nail my door shut.
Yeah, absolutely.
And there were people that would come up to me and say, I didn't vote for you, but I'm going to next time because I just don't like the way that was done. So here's what happened. I barely won that office the first time.
Yeah.
A year later, when I had to run for re-election, because it had been a special election in 93, so I turned right around and ran for re-election in 94. I received over 60% of the vote, which was the highest vote total that any Republican in the history of Arkansas had ever received.
Amazing. Yes.
It was one of those blessed moments that what was intended to hurt me helped me the most.
Yeah, and to see God's favor on you, that's something else in terms of, just your spiritual faithfulness and so forth. And you enlisted Dick Morris to help you in your reelection, was for lieutenant governor, correct?
Right.
Yeah.
And Dick's an interesting character. He was a New York Jew, and I'm a Southern Baptist Southern boy.
Right.
We could not have been more different.
Sure.
But one of the reasons that I loved Dick and that I wanted him on the team and being the consultant was because he was one of the first really, brutally honest ones that I'd ever dealt with. Most would tell you, I just want you to know I agree with all your positions. And and deep down I knew they didn't.
Right.
Dick Morris called and he says, hi, Mike, Dick Morris. I think I can help you. I've been helping all these Democrats in your state, and I've gotten Clinton elected. I know the state very well. I'm now a Republican, and I'm only doing Republican races. And he said, I'd like to put my skills to work. You're the only game in town, and I can make some money off of you, and I think I can help you get elected. And I just love the candor. I love the fact that he was brutally honest, and he wasn't trying to pretend that he was, a born-again believer. Now, here's the beautiful thing. There would come a day later that he became a believer, came to Christ, and it's just a wonderful story, but the seeds were planted back at that time.
Yeah. He's been an interesting one to watch because we do know that he started off with the Clintons,
Yeah.
and then became a Republican, started doing Republican, had a fall from grace there, I think, for a period of time, and then of course now he's walking with the Lord, and that's really
Yeah.
quite a redemption story, isn't it?
Well, it is. And when he fell and had that just terrible personal um, failure,
Yeah,
which was nothing short of spectacularly bad,
yeah,
um, he obviously got fired from his job
yeah.
with the Clintons in the White House. And I called him immediately and said, Dick, I'm not trying to hire you. I know you're not looking for work right now. But I said, I have a feeling your phone's not really ringing off the hook. And I just want you to know I love you and I'm praying for you and I'm here for you. And I
Wow.
said, I'm still your friend, Dick. He told me later I was the only person that called him. And he was so broken that was what helped him to put his life together. And so I connected him to Doug Coe in Washington. And people in the Christian world know who
Yeah,
Doug Coe was, a wonderful, godly man that,
yeah,
gosh, I think when we get to heaven, we'll find out just how influential he was. But I connected him to Doug Coe, and Dick came to know Jesus. And boy, he got a dose of it. I mean, it was
yeah,
really pretty powerful. And he and his wife reconciled. And I mean, it's been a
yeah,
beautiful story.
yeah. It really has. Yeah, and the guy's a political genius. Yeah, I mean, he's just an amazing guy.
Yeah.
So now you're in as lieutenant governor in 1996, when the height of Whitewater. Governor Jim Guy Tucker gets convicted of fraudulent loans, and he's going down.
Yeah.
And you saw this, and I don't want to look like you saw it an opportunity, but this was an opportunity, obviously, because you're lieutenant governor. It's like being vice president, right? Uh, how did that play out? Because I understand he actually went down, and then when you ran or took the office, he tried to rescind his resignation. Did he not?
Right. 5 minutes before my swearing in,
Yeah,
which had been set for 7 weeks, he took a
yeah,
long period of transition time. And he did that because that way he spent every last dime out of one fiscal year's budget and every dime out of the next year's fiscal year budget. So it was, he also appointed like 1,000 people to positions that crossed over. But all that aside, we knew the time. It was going to be January the 15th, 2 in the afternoon. He would step down.
yeah,
5 minutes before 2 o'clock, we were prepared to walk down to the House chamber for the swearing in. Capitol was filled with people who were there for the swearing in and the ceremonies. And he called me and he said, I've changed my mind. I've decided I'm not going to resign. I'm going to appeal my conviction and I'm going to remain as governor until that appeal process. Well, nothing in the Arkansas Constitution gave him that kind of ability because if you're a convicted felon, which at that point he was,
yeah,
he should have resigned immediately. But,
right,
nobody could make that case
yeah,
because that would have looked pretty unkind.
yeah,
Um, but it was, I mean, bedlam broke loose. And for several hours, we had two people claiming to be governor. It was bizarre. The state police came and said, "Who's our boss? Who do we
yeah,
answer to?" The adjutant general of the National Guard said, "Who's my commander in chief?" And so it was a tumultuous day, unlike anyone had ever seen before.
yeah,
And finally, I 90% of the legislature were Democrats at that time. So, I mean,
yeah,
it wasn't like I had friends there.
right,
But I brought the leadership of the legislative body together and I said, guys, I don't think I have to tell you that if he continues to hold this view and tries to hang on to the job, it's going to ruin your whole party. And people are so angry. And I said, I'm not trying to exploit this. I said, but we've got to get this resolved. And I said, I think that we should call for him to resign unconditionally, or we'll start impeachment proceedings in the morning.
yeah,
Well, the Democrat Attorney General agreed with that. The House Speaker and the President pro tem of the Senate all said, we're with you. And so we gave him that ultimatum, and ultimately he did resign. And I was sworn in that night, and I said, "Go get a judge. I don't care who he is. If he's got a black robe and a Bible, bring him in here. Let's get this done."
That's great. And so you filled the 2 years remaining on Tucker's term. And then in '98, you were reelected for a full 4-year term. You received a 48%, and is this correct? 48% of the African American vote.
Yeah.
That's incredible for a Republican.
Ron, to my knowledge, no Republican in America, white or black, in any state, in any election, has ever received that level of a vote total of the African American community. And here's the sad thing for me. I tried desperately to get the Republican National Committee to let me help them in an outreach, because I said, guys, you don't understand. A whole large segment of the African American community really identify with our views on a host of issues. Yep. And people didn't understand that. But like issues even on marriage and pro-life, now there would be a lot of their leaders and so-called leaders, but in the rank and file, the church-based African American community were much more conservative than people thought.
Yes.
And these are people who believe in bedrock American values.
Right.
When people said, "What did you do to change your message?" I said, "That's just it. I didn't. I presented the same message. But what I also did was something Republicans weren't doing. I didn't wait until October of an election year to go and build relationships and to show up. From the day that I got elected, when they didn't vote for me, I was building relationships, and I spent a disproportionate amount of my time and, quite frankly, even resources, because they had some of the greatest needs. For example, highest levels of hypertension and diabetes were in the African American community. So here were people who mostly lived in impoverished parts of the state without access to good medical care, desperately in poor health. And I could have said, well, hey, they didn't vote for me. I'm not going to do anything for them. I did the opposite. We put community health clinics there. We, as I would use the term, disproportionately funded healthcare access in those areas that didn't have any. And I didn't do it for political reasons. I did it because that was my job. I was the governor of everybody, not the governor of the people that voted for me. They took notice of that, and it was dramatic. And to this day, some of the deep relationships I still have in the state of Arkansas are with mayors and county officials and some of the African American pastors that I was able to get to know and love dearly and worked with to try to help meet needs in their community.
Yeah, and if I may, Governor, I'll flatter you here and maybe embarrass you a little bit, but because I do think one of the reasons that you garnered that kind of acceptance within the Black community is because you didn't pander to them. I mean, we've seen people pander to the Black community, but you, and that's what I was saying earlier, there's something about you that is genuine, that comes across genuine. You do what you say what you're going to do, and people believe you, and that is the intrinsic value that I see in you, and so automatically people see that, and so it's no wonder that you garnered that kind of acceptance within the Black community. And then, of course, in 2002, you're reelected to a second term with 53% of the vote, and then named one of the 5 best governors in the United States because of your handling of the Katrina hurricane in the South there. So you accomplished quite a bit as governor in Arkansas.
I love the job. I've never had a job, and I never will, that was as fulfilling, because being the governor of a state, you can wake up in the morning with an idea, and by that afternoon, you can either have it implemented or you can be on your way, and you can actually see things accomplished. It's not a deliberative job. It's a job about decision making.
Yes.
And some people are really made for the legislative process, and I respect that. Others of us are made for the executive branch, and I came to understand that. And I also came to realize I would be miserable in the legislature, whether the U.S. Senate or the House. I would have hated it uh, because I want to see things done. I want to get it done. Let's move it along. And at its core, the legislative branch is a deliberative branch, and it is to slow things down.
Yeah.
The job of the executive branch is speed it up, get it done.
Yes.
It's a natural tension. The founders understood that. They were brilliant at this. Oh my
Yes, they
gosh.
were.
The more I served in the government, the more I realized just how absolutely brilliant they were.
Yes.
But what I loved about the job of governor was that it was an opportunity to be a leader and a communicator. You mentioned Katrina. There were times when my background as a pastor really served me in the capacity of governor. And I sometimes would tell people the governor, in many ways, is not just the administrative leader of the government, but he's also the spiritual leader of the state,
Yes.
the chief encourager.
Yeah.
So after a tornado or a flood or an ice storm, the governor's presence is comforting.
Yes.
But when Katrina hit, most states, if they had an influx of evacuees, they were putting them in a sports arena. They'd put 8,000, 10,000 people in an arena.
Yes.
Inherently, I said, that's terrible.
Yeah.
First of all, you're going to expose people that if a disease breaks out, they're all going to get it. If there's a fight, everyone's going to be traumatized by this outbreak of a fight going on,
Yeah.
where all these people are sleeping in cots, no privacy, no sense of individualism.
Yeah.
So I hated that whole approach. And the other thing was, by congregating large masses of people in one place, we were having to think about how are we going to get their kids in school? How are we going to get them for health care? Because when they came out of New Orleans, they had nothing. They didn't have their medications. They didn't have their prescriptions with them.
Yeah.
It was horrible. It was a terrible thing. And these were precious people.
Sure.
So the first thing I did, I told everyone on our team, and we basically stopped all functions of state government to handle 75,000 evacuees that came into our state. And I said, here's what I want you to understand. Don't you dare let me hear that you made people fill out a bunch of forms and paperwork before you gave them food, a blanket, a place to sleep, a place to get a shower, and a big hug around their neck and tell them, affirm their humanity.
Yeah.
And I said, because these people have been traumatized, and I don't forget about the paperwork. I said, you treat every person coming off a plane, a bus, or however they're getting here, treat them as if it's your grandmother, your mother, your daughter.
Yeah.
I said, don't look at them like this is one of 5,000 people we're processing.
Yes.
Act like this is your family and say, how would I want someone to take care of my mother if she showed up with nothing but the clothes she was wearing and they're soaked with mud? How would I want someone to take care of her? I said, that's what you do. And I said, we'll deal with all the costs and everything later. But here's what we did, Ron. I called all the churches together from around the state and the denominations. All of them had church camps, and they had just finished their camping season. This was late August of 2005. But I knew they had not yet winterized their camps. It was too early for that. So I brought them to the governor's mansion. I said, guys, I need your camp.
Brilliant.
They looked at me, and I said, I want to use your facilities because you have bedding, showers, dining halls, but you also have it secure, and you have the capacity for families to be together, and they're all over the state. So rather than one county or area having all of these people, they're going to be spread everywhere, and we can absorb reasonably the number of people that need medical care, that need to get enrolled in school, that need to find jobs, and so on. Yeah. So that's what we did. We created little cities all over the state from the church camps. And I told them, I said, we'll assume liability. We will assume the staffing. But you know what happened? All those churches said, well, we want to help. So they piled in, and their people volunteered. It was a beautiful thing. And it was a powerful witness for Christ. And these church members who often said, what can we do to help these people? Well, they got to go and bring them blankets, cook their food, help them to get their identity reestablished, and it really worked wonderfully.
Yeah. Yeah, and that's, you talk about the difference between the executive branch and the legislative branch, and it really is a different responsibility to be a leader in the executive branch. We've seen people that have come out of the legislative branch in the presidency, and it's generally not a good thing, and we're looking at that now, but that's a story for another day. So you announced in 2007 that you're going to run for the White House. You announced it on Meet the Press. Was that with Tim Russert?
Yes.
Yeah. Good guy, wasn't he? Tim Russert.
Great guy. He was the real deal, and he asked hard questions, but they were fair questions.
Yeah.
But he asked them of everyone. He didn't just pick on Republicans. He really was a journalist in the old-fashioned way.
Yes. And he admired you. He had written something, and I'm trying to find where I wrote it down here, but he referred to you. Oh, Tim Russert referred to you as Vice President Huckabee several times.
I think he was pitching that I would be picked by McCain, but McCain didn't see it that way. That's okay.
Yeah. But you certainly took the pot shots when you ran for president, because the faith issue certainly came up. They criticized you for everything you did. I'm reading in a situation where you wished people a Merry Christmas, and you got criticized for that. And what your response was, what really matters is the celebration of the birth of Christ. Again, speaking the truth, nobody could argue with the truth, and that's what it was. What was that like to be criticized for your faith? Because you're a man of faith, although you have the political chops, because you've been you've sat in the governor's mansion in Arkansas. You've ran a state, and you ran it very well. But to come into the presidential arena now and start taking pot shots at you because of your faith, how did you handle that?
There was a part of me that was a little bit amused by it. It was like, really? So being a person of faith is somehow un-American? Is it indicative that a person has committed intellectual suicide? And I would push back on it. I would try to do it in a gracious and kind way, but I didn't just sit there and curl up in a fetal position and say, "Oh, they've hit me." I remember one time in a debate, I think it was a CNN debate, and I was asked the question, something about when did creation, how did it happen? And I thought, that's the dumbest question I've ever heard in a presidential debate. Yeah. Being president has nothing to do with the creation. Yeah. And I remember saying, look, I wasn't there when it happened, so I really couldn't tell you exactly how long it took and how it was done and all the details.
Yeah.
But I do believe that in the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. And I believe that, but I couldn't tell you exactly how it all played out. But I can tell you what I believe I would do as president. And it's not just to answer religious questions by people like you. The crowd broke into applause. People realized that it was sucker punching. And but for the most part, it's kind of like, and sometimes I would just push back when they would ask those questions. I said, well, I figured sooner or later you'd get around to asking me the religious questions. But if that's what you're going to do, at least you recognize that I do believe in God and the Bible. And maybe you ought to ask these other folks up on the stage whether they believe in God.
Yeah, exactly. Well, and I think you handled it well, because I read another situation where you're criticized for using a bookshelf behind you that resembled a cross at Christmas. And I love the way you responded. And you laughed them off by saying, okay, I will confess this. If you play the spot backwards, you'll hear Paul is dead. And those from our generation will get the backwards masking from.
Oh my gosh. Ron, of all the things that was just bizarre, the backstory of that was that we had decided that we were going to tape a spot. The Iowa caucuses were January the 2nd. So right in Christmas season, all the candidacies, the campaigns are having to compete with Santa Claus for airtime. Well, you can't compete with Santa Claus. So what do? No one wants to hear hard political messages.
Yeah.
So we decided we would do a very simple Merry Christmas ad. It was hastily put together. I did not have a script. I was coming down with the flu and I felt awful. I said, guys, I only have enough energy left to do this one time. So I said, get the camera, give me a go sign, time me down for 30 seconds and count me down. And I said, I'll land the plane at 30, but I said, I can't do this but once. And it was ad-libbed, totally ad-libbed. But we moved in, we were renting a family's home in Little Rock to tape this. And we went into the living room by their Christmas tree. And I was seated right in front of a bookshelf behind me. And, the way the bookshelf crossed over the pieces of wood, somebody thought that looked like a cross and that it was a subliminal message. I mean, there was nothing subliminal. I'm talking about Jesus. There's nothing subliminal about that. But I'll never forget, I watched on TV and there were advertising experts that they would bring in from large ad schools. And some pompous idiot would say, well, I've been in the advertising business for 40 years, and I can tell you that this was intentional. This was not subtle. Yeah. And they would go through, and we were laughing our heads off, but we estimated that we probably got close to $50 million in free advertising because every television network in America kept running that spot over and over to analyze it. And it was the craziest thing ever. It was like, thank you, God. Our spot's getting seen and the devil's paying for it.
Yeah, that's crazy. So that particular campaign, you did very well. You won the Iowa Republican caucus.
Yeah.
And your opponents were Mitt Romney, late Fred Thompson, and of course the late John McCain and Ron Paul. Third place in New Hampshire, third place in Michigan, second in South Carolina, fourth in Florida, and you won West Virginia on Super Tuesday. You received the endorsement of 50 African American leaders in Atlanta, Georgia. That's right. Again, a testament to your credibility, your authenticity, and so forth. But and then, of course, you won Kansas with 60%. Those are pretty good numbers. And then, of course, you won the Louisiana primary. Mm-hmm. What happened in that election, and talk about the outcome and so forth, and what you ended up doing?
Well, I came in second to McCain in that process. Romney was third. Yeah. Which was a good run because we never had the kind of money that we needed to really make a go of it. But per miles per gallon, we got more than anyone could have imagined.
Yeah.
One of the things that hurt us was that we missed it in South Carolina. We came in second. If we'd have won there, McCain had already said that if he lost there, he was shutting his campaign down. He would quit. So that was the sort of the dividing point. After he won there, we won a bunch of states on Super Tuesday. We were still on our feet. But the press basically decided that McCain was going to be the nominee at that point. Romney dropped out. And because of that, no matter what we were doing, we were fighting against a perception that the press had created that the primary was over. And, ultimately it was. I wasn't bitter about it. It's the way politics works. And,
sure.
You suck it up and accept that that's the way it goes. But that, of course, opened up a lot of other doors for me and media that I never would have had. I made another run for the White House in 2016. Yep. Didn't turn out so well, but that was the year Donald Trump obliterated all of us.
Yep.
And quite frankly, that was a year, and I could see it fairly early, and it was not a huge surprise, but I thought going into it that it would be the year that people would want a pragmatic governor to be president, somebody who could solve problems and who saw things in a pragmatic way. But I quickly realized that that was not what the electorate wanted. They were angry. They were in a seething rage. And they basically wanted someone to come and burn it all down. They did not want it fixed. They want it burned down.
Yes, they did.
Because they were angry. And so quite honestly, that's not my personality. That's not who I am. And I was not going to be the candidate that year, and it became very evident.
Well, you decided to drop out of that, and you threw your support behind Donald Trump. And I want to drill down into that if we could. Um, and I'll preface it by saying I believe Donald Trump was a fine president.
Yeah.
In spite of some maybe his moral characters that came out early on, and we all knew that he had those things. But I think it was an interesting endorsement for you, was it not? Or to throw your support behind Donald Trump.
I
Talk
think it
about that.
surprised a lot of people.
Yeah.
But as I told folks, I said, look, he's the only guy on that stage that's not a wholly owned subsidiary of the donor class.
Yes. Yeah.
And I said, what really is wrong with politics is that nothing changes because the same donors who support the Democrats support the Republicans.
Yeah.
And they're always going to hedge their bets. And it's all run by the donor class. And that's why we're in the mess we're in, is because these people go to each other's cocktail parties in Georgetown and they run the country. But they don't really care about that single mom who's out there in Oklahoma who can't get enough gas in her car to get to work. They just don't care. They don't know those people.
Yeah.
And Trump had a unique ability to say things, sometimes the outrageous things, I'll be quick to admit. He could be his own worst enemy. He still can be.
Yeah.
But I'll never forget, I told a group of 1,200 pastors in New York when I introduced him to them. They come from all over the country. And I said, look, this is with him sitting 5 feet from me.
Yeah.
I said, I'm not sure Donald Trump could find John 3:16 in a Mark New Testament. So let's not pretend that he is one of us. He's not. So I'm not here to tell you that I'm supporting him because he is a God-fearing, Bible-believing, evangelical Christian that prays every day to Jesus, because he doesn't. But he is committed to respecting religious liberty. He is unapologetically pro-life, and he proved that as president, the most pro-life president we'd ever had.
Yep.
He fought
pro-Israel.
And it was real. And there's a story behind why he was.
Mm-hmm.
But I said, we need somebody who will simply fight so that the government will leave us alone. That's all we want out of the government. Just leave the churches alone.
Yeah.
And, he did that. And also because he committed that he would move the embassy of Israel to Jerusalem and he would support Israel. No president ever supported Israel as much or got as much done for the Middle East peace effort that he did.
Yes.
So, I sometimes would cringe at his tweets or comments that he would make on television. But even then, I would tell people, you've been diagnosed with cancer and you have a choice between two doctors to do the surgery. One is a wonderful, godly Christian man who comes into your hospital room and he sits down on the side of the bed and he prays with you and he hugs all the family members. But he's only done the surgery 4 times and 3 of the patients died.
Yeah.
The other guy comes in, he's abrasive, he's vulgar, he's not sympathetic, he's not kind, and he's not patient. And he basically comes in and says, look, if you want me to do the surgery, I've got an opening in the morning, I can do it. But I got to know now, because if you don't want me to, somebody else will want me to. And I said, his bedside manner is not very pleasant at all. But he's done the surgery 600 times, and 94% of his patients have lived. Who do you want doing your surgery?
Yeah, no doubt. Yeah,
it's
excellent analogy. Excellent analogy. And so you were considered for a cabinet position in Trump's administration, but you decided to turn it down. Are you able to talk about what cabinet position that was?
I was offered 2 different cabinet positions, and I turned both of them down. I was also offered an ambassadorship. I never have discussed which ones, and here's the reason I haven't. Because the people who received them, I don't want them ever to think, oh, I was the second choice. He offered Huckabee that first, because they don't know that I was offered that. I'm the only one, and him and 2 or 3 people in his inner circle were there in the room when he said, would you do this? And I said, Mr. President, I'll do any and everything I can to help you, but I don't want a federal job. And that really was my case. I said, let me help you, but I don't want a federal paycheck. I just don't. It's not something I'm interested in, and I can be more helpful in other ways. And one of the positions was not one I really had an interest in doing, and
Hmm.
I didn't want to do something that wasn't passionate for me. Um, I was grateful for the opportunity, and I think, quite frankly, it shocked him a little bit that I didn't just say, "Oh yes, boy, I'd love to do that." But
Yeah.
I was very honest with him and told him uh, that I did not support him because I was looking for something out of it. And I
Yeah.
think that surprised him because sometimes people they do get on a position with the hope that they're going to be able to, get a cabinet job.
Yeah.
I didn't want one.
Yeah. And, that speaks to your character of why you don't talk about those positions because of indifference to those who had those positions. However, a shining star was introduced to the country out of the Huckabee family in the Trump administration, and your daughter Sarah. I don't know one Republican that I've talked to who doesn't absolutely admire Sarah. She nailed that position, and you've got to be tremendously proud of her.
Well, I really am, and she's a great young lady. She's got a wonderful husband. For her, her priorities are her marriage, her children.
Yeah.
She's certainly an ambitious woman, and running for governor, you got to have some ambition to do that, and a little chutzpah to say I can do this job.
Yeah.
But at her core, she is a Christian wife and mother.
Yeah.
And I think what I'm most proud of is her consistent commitment to Christ. Even her success, I believe, as a press secretary was largely because before she went into the briefing room every day, she would read from Sarah Young's book, Jesus Calling, and that was her devotional. She would tell everybody, look, don't bother me for a while. She would shut the door, take no calls, and she would just have some time to really spend time with the Lord and get her head straight, and then walk into that bunch of howling mob and deal with them. But I never doubt what she believes and whether she'll stick to it, because I think she totally understands that political jobs come and go, but faith is eternal.
Yes. Well, and she handled that job with a plumb, and she commanded that press room, and those reporters respected her, whether they liked her or not, I don't know, but they respected her, and she got a raw deal afterwards with some of the way she was treated. So yeah, and she's running. Is she still running for governor of Arkansas?
Right, and the primary is May the 24th.
Yeah,
and that will probably determine the outcome of the election, even though she'll have a Democrat opponent.
yeah,
The real key is the primary, and she's doing well and is ahead. But in politics, the old saying is, "There's only two ways to run: unopposed or scared."
boy, that's so true. Well, we'll be praying that she is successful in that endeavor. Let's talk a little bit about, because we're kind of getting to the end here. Let's talk a little bit about your media career, because we started talking about you being having broadcast ambitions early on, and you've done that through your career, and so you had a weekend show on Fox back in 2008, I believe, right?
Right, started in 08.
Yeah, and great success with that show. But you let it go because you were considering a run for president again.
Right.
And so now you're picked up by TBN, and you've been doing that since 2017, I believe, correct?
Mm-hmm.
And it's a nightly show. That's got to be a bit grueling because you're only doing weekends at Fox, and just doing my one little weekly show here. I know it goes just in a little bit of that, but you're putting on a whole production with a live band, several guests, and so forth. So how have you enjoyed doing that?
It's been a huge thrill.
Yeah.
It's the television show that I've always wanted to host.
Is it?
because it, in some ways, it's a throwback to old time television that we grew up with, a variety show. And with TBN, they wanted me to do something that was unlike anything they'd ever done, as they called
Yeah.
it, TBN 2.0. TBN has gone through some pretty significant changes.
Yes.
They don't do the telethons, and they're not doing a lot of faith
Right.
healing and prosperity
Yes.
gospel. They got rid of that
Yep.
to do solid Bible teaching. But they also want to reach a secular audience. And my show is not a Christian show.
Yeah.
It's a television show hosted by a Christian.
Yes.
And the distinction is that it's a wholesome show.
Yep.
It's family friendly, but all the guests are not there to share their testimony. We
Right.
have political guests, we have people from all walks of life, and a person doesn't have to come and share a Bible verse to be a part of that show. But that's intentional on our part, because we figure there'll be people who will watch it, who may stay over and then watch David Jeremiah,
Yeah.
or Robert Morris, or one of the great
Sure.
Bible teachers that we have on.
Yes.
But the bigger issue for me is that it's an entertaining, informative, inspirational television show that is comforting. I want it to be so that there's just enough politics to be interesting and current, but not so much to raise people's blood pressure so they blow a gasket. And I
Yeah.
think we've achieved that.
Yes. Yes. And it's a great show, and they can find it on TBN. Is it? Yeah, TBN daily. I'm sure it airs. And looking, what do they say in the area near you to find out what time it airs?
Yeah.
Right?
And they can go to Huckabee.tv, and there
Huckabee.tv.
you can find where it airs. You can also see replays of every show we've ever done, or watch individual segments. So if people say, well, I wonder what that show's like, well, they can go to the website and click on to any of the segments we've ever done.
Excellent. And I know you got a great band there, because I was in your studio
Yeah.
when we came out, and I know some of the guys in Love Song knew some of your guys in the band there. And being a musician, because let's talk about that. You are a bass player. You play guitar, and we've seen you on a number of occasions on television playing with various bands and so forth, artists. Is that something you look forward to doing with these guys?
Oh, it's been such a thrill. I mean, for
Yeah.
a kid like me that's always been kind of a garage band musician, to be able
Yeah.
to play with Leonard Skinner or Oak Ridge Boys or George Jones or Toby Keith or Def Leppard. I mean, I've played with people I have no business playing with.
Yeah.
And I've even had people say, hey, I saw you playing with, Skinner or Marshall Tucker Band or whoever. And they say, I didn't know you were that good. I said, man, I'm not that good, but it's my show. I get to play.
Yeah, that's right. I can do it. Governor, in our closing minutes here, we're living in a time that is, it's a challenging time, to say the least. We've got inflation, we've got a war brewing, hyperinflation, we've got a war brewing in Eastern Europe. We've got, there's so many things. And people, we've got the COVID thing. Of course, we're coming out of that, but people are bewildered. People are scared. People are confused. What would you say to them tonight to bring them hope? And how would you speak to them?
There's no guarantee that we won't go through some horrendous times. But the world has always gone through horrendous times. They're not any worse right now than they've been in the past. In fact, they're not nearly as bad right now as they have been in the past in various times of our history. And what we've got to do is to be faithful. I have no idea how things are going to turn out. It'd be easy for me to say, well, we're going to come out and America's going to be strong and we'll always be here and we'll always be number one nation on the planet. I don't know that. We may not be.
Yeah.
Some horrible things could happen in our own country and to our economy and to our people. But I know this, 100 years from now, things are okay for me. And they're not okay for me because I've done something. They're going to be okay for me because I put my faith in the one who did something. I put my faith in Jesus. I can't fix things, but he already has.
Yes.
And it's not that he's going to. I look at it that this is a game that's already been played, and I'm simply getting to see how it's going to play out. It's fresh to me, but it's not fresh to him. He's already written the last chapter, and in the end, we win. So, for believers, it's one of the things that I take joy in being a believer, is that there'll be lots of bumps and bruises, and I may end up in the ditch more than I want. But when it's all said and done, when the clock ends, we win the game. Yes. And that's our hope. Yes. And I think what God calls me to be is not successful in some way that I would define it. What God calls me to be is faithful, faithful to his word, faithful to proclamation of who he is, and faithful in my commitment to following him. And if that causes me to lose my life, to lose all that I've worked for, well, I don't hope that happens, but my job isn't to be famous. It's not to be wealthy. It's not to be successful as the world defines it. Yeah. It's to be faithful. And I always say that at the end of my life, I want to hear 6 words from the Creator. And if I hear them, I'll know my life was successful. Well done, good and faithful servant. That to me is the real test of life.
Amen. Folks, you're looking at a man who has lived his life from a standpoint of faith. He's done his political career with a biblical worldview. He operates his life from a biblical worldview. And if you're watching tonight and those words resonate with you, if you're bewildered, if you're lost, if you're feeling like I don't have any hope, I don't know where to turn. Jesus said, I came to give you life, and I came to give you life more abundant. And he also says, behold, I stand at the door and I knock. Any man who hears my voice and opens the door, I'll come in and sup with him and he with me. Meaning God is inviting you into his very home, or he wants you to invite him into your home and fellowship with him. It's a life with a relationship. It's a faith with a relationship. It's not about religion. And by praying a simple prayer, by saying, Lord, I'm a sinner, forgive me for my sins. I invite you to come into my life, be my Savior, save me, and give me new life. And Jesus is true at his promise, and he will do that. If you prayed that prayer tonight, let us know at prayer@theupperroompresents.com. That's prayer@theupperroompresents.com. We'd love to send you a Bible, help you get established in your faith, and encourage you. Governor, thank you so much for being with us and taking the extended time that you did. I know we talked about originally maybe doing 40 minutes, but there's so much there, and you're such an interesting man in your career. You are a national treasure. I know you'll deflect that, but you are. And I'm very honored to have the opportunity to spend this time with you and get to know a little bit more about you.
Ron, it has been my privilege. Thank you, my brother. God bless.
Thank you. Folks, thanks for watching, and we'll see you next week on Real Talk with Ron Strand. God bless you.